The new girl walked through the school gate with her bag held close to her side, eyes taking in everything quietly. The building was old, with wide hallways and faded notice boards filled with announcements and photos from past years. Students moved in groups, laughing, talking, and barely noticing her. She did not look nervous, but she was careful, as if she had learned long ago to observe before speaking. Moving to a new place was not new to her. She had done this many times before, and each time she reminded herself to stay calm, be polite, and let time do the rest. Her classroom was already half full when she entered. The sound of chairs scraping and voices echoing filled the air. Some students glanced at her for a moment and then looked away. Others stared a little longer, curious. She chose an empty seat near the window, placing her notebook neatly on the desk. Outside, the flag fluttered slowly in the morning breeze. She liked that seat. It gave her something steady to focus on. When the teacher walked in, the room slowly quieted down. The teacher was known for being strict, someone who liked control and order. The teacher's eyes scanned the room and paused briefly on the new girl. There was a look of interest, but not the kind that felt welcoming. Attendance was taken, and when the new girl's turn came, she answered softly but clearly. The teacher nodded once, writing something down, then moved on. A few minutes later, the teacher began a casual discussion to get the class talking. Questions were asked about hobbies, favorite subjects, and where everyone was from. When the teacher reached the new girl again, the tone changed slightly. "So, you're new here," the teacher said. "What brings your family to this town?" The girl straightened her back a little. She had answered this question many times before. "My father's work," she replied calmly. "Oh?" the teacher said, raising an eyebrow. "And what kind of work does he do?" There was nothing unusual about the question, but something in the teacher's voice made the room feel tense. The girl hesitated for just a second, then answered honestly. "He serves in the military," she said. "He's a high-ranking officer." A few students exchanged looks. Someone in the back let out a quiet laugh, thinking it was a joke. The teacher's expression hardened. "A high-ranking officer?" the teacher repeated, louder this time. "That's a big claim." The girl felt the eyes of the class turn toward her. She kept her hands folded on the desk and nodded. "Yes." The teacher crossed their arms. "You expect us to believe that?" The room grew quiet. The girl did not understand why her words were being questioned. She had not spoken proudly or tried to impress anyone. She had simply answered. "I'm just saying the truth," she replied, her voice steady but soft. The teacher let out a short, sharp breath. "People often exaggerate to seem important," they said, "especially when they want attention." The words stung. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The girl felt her face grow warm, but she did not lower her eyes. She had been taught never to argue with elders, especially in public spaces. Respect mattered, even when it was not returned. "I don't need attention," she said quietly. "You asked, and I answered." The teacher shook their head slowly. "Let's be realistic," they said. "Someone with your background, transferring into the school mid-year, it doesn't add up." The sentence hung in the air. The meaning was clear, even if it was not spoken directly. The girl felt something tighten in her chest. She realized that this was not about facts. It was about assumptions. She chose not to speak again. She looked down at her notebook and waited for the moment to pass. Silence felt safer than defending herself. She knew who her father was. She knew the life she lived. She did not need to prove it to anyone in that room. The teacher moved on, but the atmosphere had changed. The lesson continued, yet the girl felt like she was sitting behind a glass wall, present but distant. Every time the teacher's voice rose, she flinched slightly, worried another comment might be directed at her. During the break, some students whispered. A few glanced at her and smiled politely, unsure of what to think. No one said anything directly. She ate her lunch quietly, thinking about her father's words from the night before. He had told her to be kind, to stay patient, and to let actions speak louder than words. When classes ended that day, she walked home slowly. The sky was beginning to turn orange, and the streets were calm. She did not tell anyone about what had happened. Not because she was afraid, but because she believed problems at school should be handled with dignity. Her father had enough responsibility already. She did not want to add to it. At home, life was simple and orderly. Her father's uniform hung neatly in the closet, pressed and clean. He spoke little about his work, but his presence alone carried discipline and calm. That evening, he mentioned that he had an upcoming meeting at her school later in the week. It was routine, he said. Administrative matters. Nothing important. The girl nodded and listened, unaware of how those words would soon change everything. Back at school the next day, the teacher's behavior grew colder. Instructions were short. Questions from the girl were ignored or answered with sharp replies. It was subtle enough that no one could openly complain, but clear enough that the girl felt it deeply. Still, she remained polite, completing her work carefully and keeping her head down. She reminded herself that truth had a way of standing firm, even when doubted. She believed that respect did not come from titles alone, but from character. And though she felt small in that classroom, she carried something stronger than anger or pride. She carried patience. As the days moved forward, the tension quietly built, unnoticed by most, but heavy for those involved. The girl did not know when or how things would change. She only knew that they would, because lies collapse eventually, and truth, no matter how quiet, has a way of walking in without knocking. The days that followed felt longer than usual. The new girl learned the rhythm of the school quickly, but the feeling of being watched never left her. Every morning, she walked into the classroom with the same quiet focus, choosing the same seat near the window. She liked routines. They helped her feel steady when everything else felt uncertain. The teacher's behavior did not improve. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was the kind of coldness that slipped into small moments. When the girl raised her hand, the teacher looked past her. When she answered a question correctly, the response was short and empty, while others received praise. Homework was checked twice, as if mistakes were expected. Each small action sent the same message without saying it out loud. The class noticed. Some students felt uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. It was easier to stay quiet than challenge authority. A few students began to distance themselves from the girl, afraid that being close to her might draw unwanted attention. Others simply watched, unsure of what was right. The girl understood more than people realized. She could feel the shift in the room, the quiet judgment, the whispers that stopped when she walked by. Still, she chose not to react. Her father had taught her that dignity was strongest when it remained calm. Anger, he always said, should never control your actions. One afternoon, the teacher returned graded papers. When the girl received hers, a red mark stood out. She had been marked wrong on a question she knew she had answered correctly. She checked the book, then her notes. She was certain. Slowly, she stood up. "Excuse me," she said politely. "May I ask about this answer?" The teacher looked up, clearly annoyed. "Sit down," they replied. "The grade is final." "I'm sorry," the girl said, still calm. "But I followed the example exactly." The teacher's eyes narrowed. "Are you questioning my judgment?" The room went silent. The girl felt her heart beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. "No, I just want to understand." The teacher sighed loudly, as if tired of the conversation. "Some students think rules don't apply to them," they said, glancing around the room. "But this is not the place for stories or excuses." The girl slowly sat back down. Her hands trembled slightly under the desk, but her face remained still. She stared at the paper, not because of the grade, but because she realized something important. This was no longer just unfairness. It was personal. That evening, she walked home under a cloudy sky. Her steps were slower than usual. At home, her father noticed the change immediately. He had a way of reading silence better than words. During dinner, he asked how school was going. "It's fine," she said, as she always did. He looked at her for a moment longer, then nodded. He did not push. He believed trust worked both ways. If something was wrong, she would speak when ready. The next day at school, the teacher announced an upcoming class presentation. Each student would speak about their family background or future goals. When the teacher's eyes landed on the new girl, a faint smile appeared. "This should be interesting," the teacher said. The girl felt the meaning behind the words. She knew the presentation would bring the same doubts back into the open. Still, she did not complain. She went home and prepared carefully, choosing simple words and focusing on values rather than titles. On the day of the presentations, students took turns speaking. Some talked about family businesses, others about dreams of becoming doctors or athletes. When it was the girl's turn, she stood calmly at the front of the room. She spoke about discipline, moving often, and learning to adapt. She mentioned her father's service again, without pride or drama, simply as part of her life. She talked about respect, responsibility, and serving something larger than oneself. Before she could finish, the teacher interrupted. "Let's stop there," they said. "You don't need to continue with imaginary stories." A quiet gasp moved through the room. The girl froze for a moment, then slowly closed her notebook. She nodded once and returned to her seat without saying another word. The silence felt heavy, thick with discomfort. After class, the principal's assistant stopped her in the hallway. "Your father has a scheduled visit later this week," they said. "Just routine." The girl thanked them and walked on. She did not connect the moment to what was happening in class. To her, school problems stayed at school. Home was a place of peace. But the teacher seemed different after that day. More nervous, more watchful. It was as if something unseen was approaching, something that could not be controlled or dismissed. The girl continued to show up, do her work, and remain respectful. Inside, though, the weight grew heavier. She wondered how long silence could protect her. She wondered if patience always meant strength. What she did not know was that truth had already started moving, quietly, steadily, toward the classroom. And when it arrived, it would not need to raise its voice. For now, the girl waited, not in fear, but in quiet resolve. She believed that honesty did not need to fight. It only needed time. By the middle of the week, the classroom felt different. Not louder or quieter, but heavier, like something was hanging in the air. The new girl noticed it the moment she stepped inside. Conversations dropped faster when she walked past. Eyes followed her more openly now. Everyone knew something was wrong, even if they didn't understand it fully. The teacher arrived later than usual that morning. When they entered, their movements were stiff, their voice sharper than before. Books were opened, lessons began, but the calm rhythm of learning was gone. Every word felt tense. The girl kept her focus on her work. She wrote carefully, checking every line twice. She had learned that effort mattered, even when appreciation did not come with it. Still, it was hard not to feel the weight pressing down on her chest. During a group task, students were told to pair up. For a moment, no one moved toward her. Then one student hesitated, looked around, and quietly took the seat beside her. They didn't say much, but that small act meant more than words. The girl offered a small smile in return. As they worked, the teacher walked around the room, stopping briefly at each desk. When they reached the girl's table, they lingered longer than necessary. Papers were examined closely. A pen tapped against the desk. "You missed a step here," the teacher said, pointing. The girl leaned forward and looked. "I followed the example," she replied gently. The teacher's jaw tightened. "Do not argue," they said. "I'm not arguing," the girl answered. "I'm explaining." The teacher straightened up and moved on without responding. The partner beside the girl looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Later that day, the principal's office sent a note asking the girl to come by after class. Her heart skipped slightly, but she remained calm. She had done nothing wrong. Still, walking down that hallway felt longer than usual. Inside the office, the principal greeted her kindly and asked how she was settling in. The girl answered honestly but carefully. She spoke about adjusting, about missing her old school, about liking the classes. She did not mention the teacher. She believed complaints should be made only when truly necessary. The principal nodded, listening closely. "Your father mentioned you were very disciplined," they said casually. The girl paused. "He tries to teach me well," she replied. The principal smiled. "He will be visiting soon. Just a routine meeting." The girl nodded again and left the office. The meeting felt harmless, but something about it stayed with her. Back in class the next day, the teacher announced a surprise quiz. Groans filled the room. The girl opened her paper and began calmly. She worked steadily, answering each question with care. When the papers were collected, the teacher paused at her desk. "Make sure this is your own work," they said quietly. The girl looked up, confused. "Of course," she replied. The teacher moved on, but the message was clear. Trust was being questioned again. At lunch, the girl sat alone, watching clouds move slowly across the sky. She thought about the many schools she had attended, the many classrooms she had entered. This was not the first time she had felt misunderstood, but it was the first time she felt judged without reason. That evening, her father noticed her silence more than usual. After dinner, he asked her to sit with him for a moment. His voice was calm, his posture relaxed. "Is everything all right at school?" he asked. She hesitated, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to choose her words carefully. "Some things are difficult," she said, "but I can handle it." He studied her face. "Remember," he said, "respect does not mean accepting unfairness. It means knowing when to stand firm." She nodded, absorbing his words. The next morning, the teacher received a message during class. Their face changed as they read it. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed their eyes. They cleared their throat and continued teaching, but their focus was broken. Whispers began to spread. Someone mentioned that a high-level official would be visiting the school. No names were spoken, but curiosity filled the halls. The girl heard the whispers and remained quiet. She did not connect them to herself. She had learned that not everything needed explanation. As the day went on, the teacher became more restless. Instructions were rushed. Mistakes were made. It was as if control was slipping, and they could feel it. By the final bell, tension had settled deep into the walls of the school. Something was approaching, something unavoidable. The girl packed her bag slowly and looked once more out the window. The flag moved gently, just as it had on her first day. She took a deep breath. She did not know what the next day would bring. She only knew she would walk into that classroom the same way she always had. Calm, honest, ready. And sometimes that was enough. The morning began like any other, but the air inside the school felt tight. The new girl noticed it as soon as she stepped through the doors. Teachers spoke in lower voices. Staff members moved quickly, checking their watches, straightening papers, adjusting their posture. Something important was expected, even if most students did not yet understand what it was. In the classroom, the teacher stood near the desk, arranging books again and again, even though they were already neat. When students settled into their seats, the teacher reminded everyone to behave properly. The words sounded more nervous than strict. The girl took her usual place near the window. She opened her notebook and waited. Her face was calm, but inside, she felt a quiet awareness, like the moment before a storm breaks. She did not know why. She just felt that this day would not pass quietly. The lesson began, but it lacked flow. The teacher paused often, losing their place, correcting small things that did not matter. A few students exchanged looks. Something was clearly off. Halfway through the class, there was a knock at the door. The sound was firm but respectful. Every head turned. The teacher froze for a brief second before saying, "Come in." The door opened, and the principal stepped inside. Behind them stood a man in a neatly pressed uniform. His posture was straight, his presence calm but powerful. The room fell silent instantly. Even the students who usually whispered sat still. The man did not raise his voice or demand attention. He did not need to. His calm carried weight. The principal spoke first, explaining that the visit would only take a few moments. The teacher's face had gone pale. Their confident stance from earlier days was gone. They nodded quickly and stepped aside. The principal turned to the class. "We won't interrupt your lesson for long," they said. "We just needed to introduce a guest." The man took a small step forward. His eyes moved across the room, slow and steady, then rested briefly on the girl by the window. There was no dramatic expression, just a quiet look of reassurance. She straightened slightly, feeling her chest tighten with emotion she did not show. The principal continued, explaining the man's role and rank in the military. The words landed softly but firmly. A few students widened their eyes. Others sat frozen, trying to understand what they were hearing. The room was completely silent. The teacher swallowed hard. The man finally spoke. His voice was calm, clear, and measured. He thanked the school for welcoming his daughter and spoke about the importance of education, respect, and fairness. He did not mention any names. He did not accuse. He did not explain further. But every word felt directed. As he spoke, the teacher avoided eye contact. Their earlier certainty had disappeared. The authority they relied on no longer felt secure. The man turned slightly toward the girl's desk. "I've taught my child to speak honestly and act with respect," he said. "I trust the same values are upheld here." No one breathed. The girl kept her eyes forward. She felt many things at once: pride, relief, and a quiet sadness. She had never wanted this moment to prove anything. She had only wanted fairness. The principal thanked the man again and suggested continuing the lesson. The visit, they said, would continue elsewhere in the school. Before leaving, the man looked once more at the class. "Judge people by their actions," he said calmly, "not by assumptions." Then he left the room. The door closed softly behind him. For several seconds, no one moved. The teacher stood frozen, hands gripping the edge of the desk. The confident voice that once filled the room was gone. When they finally spoke, it was quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "Open your books," they said. No one turned a page. The girl remained still, her eyes on her notebook. She felt the room shift around her. The whispers, the doubts, the stares from before were gone. In their place was understanding. The teacher cleared their throat again. "Let's continue," they repeated. Slowly, students obeyed, but the lesson never truly resumed. The moment had changed everything. Authority built on assumption had cracked, and everyone felt it. During the break, students gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Some looked at the girl with new respect. Others looked embarrassed, realizing how easily they had believed doubt. A few offered quiet smiles. One student simply nodded at her as they passed. That was enough. The teacher did not approach her. They stayed near the desk, busy with papers that did not need attention. Later that day, an announcement was made that classes would end early. Administrative meetings were scheduled. The halls buzzed with speculation. The girl packed her bag and walked out calmly. Outside, the sky was bright, the air clear. Her father waited near the gate, standing tall, speaking quietly with staff members. When he saw her, he smiled softly. "Did you have a good day?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes," she replied. They walked home together, side by side, without discussing what had happened. Words were not necessary. Behind them, the school stood quieter than usual. Inside its walls, lessons were still being learned, not from books, but from truth revealed without force. And for the first time since arriving, the girl felt fully seen. The days after the visit felt quieter, but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something heavy has passed through and left the air clearer behind it. When the girl returned to school the next morning, she noticed small changes right away. Staff members greeted her more warmly. The halls felt less tense. Even the walls seemed to listen more closely. In the classroom, the teacher arrived on time and stood still for a moment before beginning. Their voice was calmer, slower, and more careful. Instructions were clear and fair. When students answered questions, they were acknowledged equally. When the girl raised her hand, The teacher looked at her directly and nodded. Yes, the teacher said. It was a small word, but it meant everything. The girl answered simply. The teacher listened and moved on without comment. No doubt, no edge, just a normal exchange. The room breathed again. At break time, students gathered nearby. Some spoke to her for the first time. They asked where she had lived before, what subjects she liked, what she planned to do after school. The questions were gentle, curious, and kind. She answered honestly, keeping her words simple. She did not talk about ranks or titles. She talked about moving often, learning to adapt, and finding strength in routine. One student apologized quietly for laughing earlier in the week. Another admitted they had believed the rumors because it was easier than thinking for themselves. The girl listened without judgment. She nodded and thanked them for being honest. Forgiveness came naturally to her. She knew people often followed the loudest voice in the room, even when it was wrong. Later that day, the principal made a brief announcement. They spoke about respect, fairness, and the importance of treating every student with dignity. No one was called out. No punishment was announced publicly, but the message was clear, and everyone understood why it was being said. The teacher listened from the side of the room, their expression unreadable. When class resumed, they kept their distance but remained fair. There was no warmth yet, but there was no hostility either. It was a beginning. That afternoon, the girl stayed behind to organize her books. As she turned to leave, the teacher spoke. "Wait," they said. The girl stopped and faced them. "I owe you something," the teacher continued, choosing their words carefully. "I was wrong. The room was empty. There was no audience, no pressure. I made assumptions," the teacher said quietly. "That should not have happened." The girl listened, her hands folded in front of her. She did not interrupt. "I'm sorry," the teacher added. The girl nodded once. "Thank you for saying that." There was no anger in her voice, only calm. The teacher exhaled, as if a weight had finally lifted. "You handled everything with more patience than many adults would," they said. The girl offered a small smile. "My father taught me that." She left the room feeling lighter, not because she had been proven right, but because honesty had finally found space to breathe. At home, life returned to its steady rhythm. Her father listened as she spoke, not just about what happened, but about how it made her feel. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he nodded. "Strength is not loud," he said. "You showed that." The days turned into weeks. The classroom became a place of learning again. Group work felt easier. Questions were answered fairly. The girl no longer felt like she was behind glass. She was part of the room. She began helping classmates who struggled, explaining lessons patiently. Trust grew naturally. Respect followed. One afternoon, the class was assigned to write about a moment that changed how they saw the world. Many students struggled to begin. The girl wrote slowly, choosing her words with care. She did not describe the visit directly. Instead, she wrote about silence and how it can reveal more than noise ever could. When the teacher returned the papers, the girl's work had a simple note written at the bottom. "Well said." Nothing more was needed. On the last day before a short break, the class gathered for a small project presentation. When it was the girl's turn, she stood confidently. Her voice was clear, her posture relaxed. She spoke about fairness, about listening before judging, and about how understanding begins when people choose to look beyond surface details. The room listened. When she finished, there was a brief pause, then quiet applause. Not loud, not dramatic, but sincere. As the bell rang, students filed out, talking and laughing. The girl packed her bag and looked once more at the window where she had first sat alone. The flag outside moved gently in the wind, steady and calm. She walked out of the classroom knowing something important had changed, not just for her, but for others too. A lesson had been learned that no textbook could teach. Sometimes truth does not need to shout. Sometimes it only needs to arrive, stand still, and let the silence do the rest.